All set?
We should be. I make no guarantees.
Welcome to 1632 reading What You Want. What we're hoping to do in this one is largely hear from you guys on what sort of stories you like. If you want to follow up on anything that you've read, we will do our best to answer any questions about that. So let's start on this end and just introduce yourself and mention what you write in 1632.
I'm Bethanne Kim. I actually write, largely what I write is what we call infill, and I also do things from more of a woman's perspective. Like issue 100, volume 100 of the Gazette, we were asked to write things about the committees of correspondence, and there was a story about the freedom marches, and the only thing we knew was, in terms of Gretchen getting it, we knew Gretchen got permission to use it as a McDonald's, and we know no one ever learned how she got that permission. So, what happened? And I wrote that story, which filled in that background detail, and I'll write things like what the history, how the Red Cross grew in universe. It has a name change in the course of the story, the Red Shield. I wrote about medical training, and I'll also write about things that none of the guys would. Like I have a rather extended scene I mentioned in the costuming one on how underwires are evil, and guys don't really get that. Women are all like, ooh, and guys are, and I wrote a story about being a nursing mother and things like that. So those are the sort of the areas I write in.
My name is Bjorn Hasseler. I largely write about Neustadter's European Security Services, who are former soldiers that figured out that the uptackers don't like mercs, but if you're Wells Fargo stagecoach guards with a bit of hard-boiled private eye, that's perfectly okay.
Let's see. Russia, economics, steam power, dirigibles, airplanes, this and that.
And I'm Chuck Thompson, also an editor at 1635 and 1632 and beyond. And I've only written short stories so far, but I'm working on a novel length. My stories tend to be similar to Bethanne in that they're more people oriented, and less weird tech. In fact, no weird tech. But I always like to incorporate that somehow the Ring of Fire has matters in the story, and it has changed what happens to these folks. Sometimes they're downtimers, sometimes they're uptimers. That's the type of thing I like to write.
Thank you.
One thing I will add we've been trying to do more of recently, in particular, is incorporating some of the things that happened in Mannington. Particularly, Mannington is the town Granville is based on. One of the big differences, if you go into Mannington itself, there is no multi-story building for the Croat raid. It doesn't exist. But if you look at building pictures from the 70s or 80s, there is a building downtown. And during our visit last year, we found out that there was actually an arsonist in '92 who burnt down the building, and that's why there's just this little stub of the old building. And Bjorn incorporated that into his most recent story in volume 4 of the current issue of our magazine, so you can learn why that didn't happen in our universe, even though it did in the real one. And we're paying more attention to some of the real estate and things, so we're trying to really incorporate things from a real town.
And what do you like to read?
I'll start.
Sure.
I like things that make it more real to me. As I know I've mentioned before, in reading the 1632, I feel that he invited me into a world that I actually feel I live in. And I can just disappear into that, and there aren't things that jar me. There aren't things, there's not long descriptions of some sort of horrible tortures being done to somebody. I'm being invited to live in that world. And to me, things that you all can write that extend that experience makes it even more like, this is my home away from home. And it just is a wonderful thing to pick up my iPad or pick up my, a book and go disappear into that alternate home.
Robert Waters of the Cassini stories, he's had 4 parts published and the 5th part is, and the final part is waiting. It's back in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could publish that book every month.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think the reason is a couple of rules that Eric set when fan fiction started to appear. First of all, you could have anything in Grantville that was in Mannington. All technology and history up to the time transfer event on both tracks up to 2000 and up to 1631 had to be absolutely real. And after that, people's behavior, technology development, the creation of new things had to evolve in a plausible way from the situation at the time of the event. You could go into weird tech, you could do things that were never done in the real world, but you could do them because now you were in a different situation that forced different decisions on people. The politicians, the mechanics, the engineers. You might adopt different solutions as long as they were potentially solutions that could have existed but were bypassed in the real world.
One of my favorite stories of coming to cons is going to Liberty Con back in 2015. And a gentleman in full steampunk cosplay came up to us just as we arrived and attempted to sell us a dirigible. And within seconds, Ira Cooper and Kevin Evans had borrowed paper and pencil, and they were doing lift calculations and explaining to him why his dirigible was not making it off the ground with all those heavy cannons on board. We weren't even checked into the hotel at this point.
I, frankly, am sick of things that go boom, 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 boom. All the explanations of the technology of the armaments is beginning to drive me nuts. I think there is an excessiveness. Mind you, if we start going by numbers, there are an awful lot of toys for grown-up boys people in fandom, but I, for one, think that the proportion devoted to the cardinal rifle and this, that, and the other, I'm getting a little tired of it. Mind you, there are wars, yes, but can't we have something else than armaments? I'm getting to the point where I'm knowing what carronades or this kind of thing is doing. I'm fed up with it. I want more of the human interest stuff. I really do. Because boom, boom, boom. No, I don't like what a friend of mine years ago called Rambo science fiction. It gets a bit much.
I got to admit that there's a bit of Rambo in Diogenes Club, but that's a murder mystery as well as, espionage.
Well, 200 people have written in this universe, and there's just all kinds of fiction that's been written in it. Some of it is military science fiction, some of it is pure technology science fiction, there's romance in it. You can pick and choose what you want to read.
Well, and one of it is we need, and this is really a paired set of panels, right? This one is, what do you want us to write? And the other one is, what are we looking for in authors and what storylines do we want to move forward? And in a shared universe like this, if we suddenly had 50 romance writers decide to join us and write in our universe, then there wouldn't be very much tech coming out for a while because we'd have all these romance stories, right? And they might have tech and they might have military and things in them, but it's really, we have a lot of writers. I like sewing, that's why we did the cosplay thing. And like I said, I believe I said at one point, I'm solidly at a home ec 8th to 9th grade level of my sewing skills, right? I acknowledge that. I'm not a great seamstress, but I'm enthusiastic and I have enough knowledge to write things in universe. So that's why Irene Steiner is a seamstress. So we need writers with those areas of interest, and then we'll get the stories.
Your stories don't come across as tech, but really some of that stuff is tech.
Yeah.
The same as when I'm writing about the Bible Society, the Greek and the New Testament textual criticism are really a non-material form of tech that takes that slot in those stories.
Is there anything more specific you guys can talk about, because we can tell our writers, right? And that's why we're asking you, because we can go back and we can say, people would like some less click boom stories.
Along those lines, you might like, Jody Lynn Nye's got a novel coming out.
Weaver's Tale.
Weaver's Tale.
October.
And I don't know all the details in there, but I think it's less boom swashbuckle. And the one before that, you read Parcel of Rose? That's pretty good. A little swashbuckling in there, but I think you'll like Jody's. The India books.
Those were quite fine. Those I liked because for one thing,
I think there's less tech in those.
Yeah.
They're great
Well,
stories.
there's a ton of tech.
Muggles and the Peacock Throne
Yeah.
coming out.
There's a ton of tech in the Moogle books, but it's hiding behind the characters.
Yeah, it's
There
not
you are,
boom
you see.
boom. It's I don't think.
That's a really good way to put it. Hiding the tech behind the characters should be what everybody keeps in mind when they're writing.
The Moogle book, I didn't know those historical characters, and when I read it through, I told Griff that, I was able to keep them straight. I didn't have any basis to start with. Whereas with the European characters, I have a general knowledge of the, how the 30 Years' War went and who these major players are. But I thought he did a great job in characterization on that one, where it's like, I might mispronounce your name, but I know what you do, and I know what you're like, and I know who you don't like.
Lady behind you has.
Yeah, I would like to see, there are a lot of female characters in this book who aren't having children at the rate they should be if they're not using birth control, and so if they're not, then there needs to be a reason why. Like, why has not Sharon not had a child yet? There shouldn't just be, it needs to be explained.
Yeah, well, actually by now, depending on when you are in the universe, by now they probably should have latex condoms.
Well, then that should be,
Yeah.
made clear, because if you're not having child after child after child after child, it needs an explanation.
Every 2 years.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
mentioned in a couple of places, but not prominently.
So,
The novel, I have 2 novels that were published by Ring of Fire Press, and I have a third that was almost done, and all 3 are contracted by Bain, so they will be out at some point in the ebook only category. The third one, Red Shield, has a massive addition, like he basically doubles in size. They have an entire new wing, 3 sides. One side is Red Shield, Red Cross, and a NICU. One side is pediatrics and a PICU. And the third side is women and birthing and delivery. So there is an entire new section being added to the hospital specifically for women's healthcare issues.
And another thing too, and this is something, I think in modern day Italy, I think birth control is banned because of the Catholic Church, but they have this very low birth rate anyway because they their Italian men pride themselves on their abilities to pull out. So that could be something that could be explained. It says that we can't necessarily control when you're going to have the children, but you will definitely reduce the number that you have over the years. And I think that might be a good way You know, because men they don't like condoms now. They're definitely not gonna like the versions that they would have in 1632. Yeah, so I think that might be a better way to explain any, you know, why we're not always having child after child after child.
And they're definitely going to spend to litigation. There were a couple of men who were explaining to me why these things wouldn't be accepted and no one would be okay with them. And I finally got annoyed and I just wrote the stories that's in canon that they're having them and they're going to get more popular, like more people will learn.
Yeah.
And that's only effective for women past a certain point when they're clearly done having children.
Terry Howard and I have written a couple of stories involving births.
Did you have Pat? No,
I'm good for right now.
Okay.
I would like to, well, there's a lot I'd like to see down the road, but the China story, I'd like that to continue.
I think Harvard's got a contract for that, though it's Japan, but China's probably gonna be at least somewhat involved in it. And I know that he's talked to me about what he's doing in China. So yeah, there's a good chance.
What else? It's what we're here for.
The New World, I like that. Wish the mainstream novels would come out quicker, but
Yeah.
I guess you don't have anyone with the whip stand. But, and I do like the shorter novels that have just one point of view, the protagonist. That's, you know, good for a rainy weekend.
Not me. I like the great big ones where
Well, I like them too, but
Flynn was really amazing in his ability to write a novel from shifting perspectives. You know, every time the perspective changed, you were all of a sudden inside someone else's head. And I remember debating the Kremlin games with someone online who was saying, oh, well, this is wrong, and I'm like, don't you realize that the opinions of this or that person are that character's opinions and not necessarily the author's opinions? Because Flynn has an ability to do that. And he like never came back at me. So it was like,
They came out of the word processor like that. I remember when he was working on Ottoman Onslaught, he asked several people to read over chapters. He said, I'm really up against the deadline here and I'm going to catch anything very quickly. And I'm going to be writing 1 or 2 chapters a day. And we were like, okay. And he would post these things and we'd read them and they were like almost at final publication level right then.
Yeah.
It was wild.
the things I'd like to see, as I mentioned yesterday, were continuations of John Deacon's stories about vaccination in the New World, Herb Sokolow's stories about trying to turn the North Atlantic into a Danish lake. If someone can pick up the torch from the Evanses about Denmark, you know, the Danish stories and chocolate shops and stuff like that, that'd be wonderful too.
Oh, yeah, I love that story.
You know, I have this fantasy of Denmark getting involved in the war against the Ottomans by sending in the Danish airship force, you know, which I have this imagination is probably the biggest airship force in the world. I don't know. And then the other thing is the anti-slavery stuff. You know, Eric always wanted to get to that. I think he and David Weber were early on supposed to write a novel that would be sort of centering around the Navy's war against the slave trade. I'd love to one day, you know, get to that storyline.
That was a plan that, of the various books that were in line, that one is one that got most impacted when Eric died. And it's going to take a while to
Which one was
cover
this
that
again?
plot.
The one about the slave trade, correct?
Which one was that?
It,
It's not a,
it was never written, and apparently when Eric passed, that was the one that was least ready to be.
Oh, but
Picked
you
up
guys
by
are working
someone
on it?
else.
Okay.
Just sort
Oh,
of-
not me.
It's on hold. You could consider it on hold at this point, to do that with things, I believe.
I keep having this picture in my mind in terms of saving indigenous populations, the opportunity. I keep having this picture in my mind of people in hazmat suits chasing Australian Aborigines around, trying to stick them with hypodermic needles. And it's like same for Hawaii. that would be, so it would be interesting if somebody have a plan for how they might do that. Like maybe we'll tell them this is some sort of like, we're gods, and you must come over here and do
But the
this.
God's supposed to be crazy.
The God's like crazy. Come on, why we stick you with this? And,
We had,
okay.
we had a Native American doing it himself in the Deacon's two novels. And then early on in the Granville Gazettes, you had the storyline about the African
Coming with the
priest
quinine.
with the quinine, yeah.
Yes.
And there's been no continuation of that. I'd
What
like
I
to see
think
a
you can be
continuation of
confident
that.
you will not see is the uptimers presenting themselves as some kind of gods.
Yeah.
And I think you can be real confident. You're not
Crazy
saying, I mean, like,
about-
not in a serious way, right? I mean, you might have a teenager goof around or something, but no, that's not gonna happen in a serious way. And, you know,
But if someone to figure out maybe a serious way, how would you
Friendly.
approach Australia or Hawaii and inoculate these people without it, how would you do it? That would be an
That's an
interesting thought
okay, that's an
exercise and an
interesting
interesting story.
You make sure that the person who's doing the inoculation does not have the disease. That's number one. You're gonna.
But how do you get them to line up to get stuck,
Mm-hmm.
You don't.
You'd have to do some kind of theater, you'd have to.
You have to convince them that you're not trying to,
Kill them.
yeah, that you respect their ways and their views, I think.
I think there has to be more of an exchange where they're working together, possibly even something where they go back and see how Western medicine works, and whether they're seeing it on a small scale in Boston or some point in the future.
Or we have something you
can.
consider really, really valuable. If you want it, let us stick you.
Because it
And
only
we will have,
takes-
I mean, there are definitely things where we'll be learning some medicine from the local populations, right? Like, I have a scene where no one has their menopause medications anymore, the HRT is gone, and the guys are as upset about it as the women, because they don't like dealing with their wives with the hot flashes, the loony swings, and all the things that come along with it. And a downtimer tells them a tea that helps,
Right.
and they're like so happy. So they're going to be very open to learning more of the herbal remedies, and so they're, unlike the original Europeans who went over who were not open to it, the uptimers will be much more open to it being an exchange of information versus being forced on them. Which is, I
Trust me.
think, where it will be successful when it otherwise might not be.
Trust me, you can make a lot of money with a book about Indian herbal medicine. Take that back to Granville, you can make money on that.
Something came around to the Jane Austen Society a few years ago in Rochester. He had gotten turned on to the idea of spruce beer. And that, of course, was a native thing for vitamin C, for scurvy. And they did cotton onto that very quickly in the people who came over. I think it was first mentioned in connection with the Vikings coming over. And he was selling spruce beer because it's mentioned in at least one of the Jane Austen novels. The stuff tastes absolutely vile. But I have to say, he was in his 40s and he looked about 25. He had a superb complexion. So maybe this stuff is really good for something beyond just vitamin C. But I want to introduce a totally new thread here. I do not feel competent to take it on, but I have read a good deal about the Rom people. And of course, they were in Europe by the 17th century. What happened to them during the 30 Years' War? They were traveling, of course, from hither to yon, but did they get caught up in the war? What happened? That's why I wore that made-up gypsy costume at the last.
So what happened to the Roma, the gypsies is your
Yeah,
question?
yeah, and is there somebody, there's something called the Gypsy Lore Society that has lots and lots and lots of documentation. And that would be a very interesting idea to put in.
And the general, yeah.
I'd like to actually see, I really enjoy the slice of life stuff. I mean, I was fascinated by your discussion of the bras and the underwear and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that really does give enough detail to really draw you into the world and everything. And I really appreciate that. But I also really like the high level stuff. I mean, I'm a history major, so I'm real big on all the high level stuff for like what happens with Essen and the Wettin brother who becomes the Duke of Burgundy. So some of those little statelets and how they manage to survive. And okay, what is Gustav going to do with Poland? I mean, you know.
But I will tell you one thing. This is one of the things I have planned. That is my second novel out that I have planned. I have St. Kilda in Scotland. It's my island. No one else gets to play with it unless I say so. Eric told me I can have it.
Which island?
So, in the real world right now, it is a conservation location. People lived on it until 1929. And so what I'm doing is the Flannery Foundation is going to buy it, like you buy a house, like it's still part of Scotland, but they own the property. And they're going to turn it into a conservation area several centuries early, with the people who live there being the ones responsible for conserving it. They're still going to eat their eggs and the bird eggs and the birds and everything like they do, but if they see a great auk come by, they're not allowed to kill it, right? And so they're going to be doing conservation work there. And this is just one step where they're part of the Celtic Christian Church, which I've taken over that storyline.
Cool.
And the Celtic Christian Church is going to become a conservation. That's going to be their focus, is conservation. And they're going to end up with a number of outlying islands there. And so I don't know if that's what you had in mind for a high level thing, but that's going to be part of the conservation movement. And of course, Garrett Vance's Dodo's story is conservation movement. So this isn't, I mean,
It's not new.
it's not new, and I don't know if it butts up in high politics in any way, but this is a high-level thing that isn't going to be really government-led, but it is going to be part of a higher-level conservation movement that takes off several centuries before it normally would. And people were asking about pollution the other day, and this is going to be kind of in conjunction.
Bluntly, some of the characterizations of the level of pollution that exists 6 years after the Ring of Fire are completely overblown. Okay, they haven't had time to make that big a mess. Certainly there are problems that we want to get nipped in the bud. And there are other things that there's just going to be a pragmatic decision of we can probably fix that later because we need this now. But yeah, we certainly want to get a jump on conservation and preventing the species from going extinct, and that there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in that.
I'd also like to see the Cardinal Richelieu resolved or advanced. I think
What happens?
yeah, I was really intrigued by. I mean, it was beautifully set up, and it's like.
He should just die, he's evil.
He's likely evil though.
No.
Misunderstood. He has his own,
He's nice to cats.
reasoning.
Charlton Heston, not Tim Curry.
This is kind of under conservation. In the New World, I'd kind of like to see a story, because one of the things that happened was pigs got away and multiplied quickly, and a lot of they didn't have fences around their crops, and there was a lot of starvation. Something to prevent something like that from happening would be a cool
I think
story.
it's probably too late for the pigs. I think they got away with this from the Spanish.
Actually, you're right, yeah.
Well, how long did it
100
take
years
to
too
migrate
late.
north?
I have no idea.
There you are.
Frederick Hendrick and Prince Gaston both had daughters who became salon givers, you know, very intellectual, corresponded with people all over Europe and what have you. And I'd sort of like to see something where Christina's peers among the children of the aristocracies, of the rulers, maybe they start getting involved in some efforts. I had this fantasy that Christina would reach out to them, and instead of
that's a cute
Vance's
idea.
story about the dodo, it'd be the Princess Islands with the
Yeah,
Dutch.
Lord Mikhail has a couple of kids.
Yeah, so, you know, I think, it's, you know, sort of like Shakespeare's grandsons and stuff like that. You might actually, that next generation or next couple of generations, you might have some interesting stories there.
Or create a school where those kids, you know, like in today's European royalty, a lot of them go to school in Wales and
Quedlinburg
and et cetera. You know, bring some of these kids all together.
That's a good one. Oh my God, the St. Smithers stories or whatever with Alistair Sid.
Some of them, though,
Make some great
are
comic
attending
stories.
Bristol High. And while there's been some laments in the mainline novels about how there were not available princesses for the very highest level marriages among the medium rank Gadel, there are all sorts of princesses of Saxony, Anhalt, and Schwarzburg, Sondershausen in particular. And those are just the two that I've had occasion to look into. I'm sure there's tons more, and something could certainly be done with this.
One like I've noticed is that as busy as the committees of correspondence are, we hear practically nothing about the letters they circulate among themselves, which is what a committee of correspondence does. And what is the fallout from those letters they circulate?
I want to know, when Gunther is wandering all over Magdeburg being tough, who's paying for it? Does he have a job of any other kind? Who's getting him his bread and cheese and the boots on his feet? You know, he seems to just float around as an independent, I don't know what. But how is this committees of correspondence financed apart from Golden Arches or something?
Early on, there was talk about the Lions Club and the Knights of Columbus donating money and stuff like that, but in Granville, specifically to the Golden Arches. But later on, maybe in Magdeburg, some of the unions and stuff like that.
I think that should
maybe.
be clarified.
Okay.
Well, the Freedom Arches might be pretty profitable.
It might be, and I have a story in Slush right now that I've been trying to figure out how to make it more of a story, and it's about delousing and killing.
Right down there in the nitty gritty.
You know, I talk about slice of life details, but what I said is COCs are going to have stations that they can help you delouse things, and that may be something where I combine those two ideas, and it leads to profitability. But Casper was wanting his own organization.
I'd like to see, I think someone mentioned in another panel, how the Ottoman onslaught kind of opens up into people wanting to use almost insurgent tactics to harass the Ottoman Empire, to maybe have them draw back from Vienna. So maybe some of the Balkans, Montenegro, all of these kind of disaffected parts of the empire
But
can,
they're already disaffected.
yes, but they're not supported. And if you have an insurgency, then it's going to create a conflict, an actual real
The
conflict.
USE as the England
Correct.
supporting the resistance
Yes.
in Austria.
Or maybe even using the Shia in Persia, because in 1630, I think in real time, Baghdad fell to the Ottomans from the Persians.
I think we had the opposite happening this time. I can't remember what novel.
I'm sorry, you can't hear you.
Oh, I said, I think somewhere we had the opposite happening this time around. The the Ottomans attacked the Persians preemptively to keep them from interfering.
Yeah.
They took Baghdad back, yeah.
Of course, they might not necessarily stay suppressed.
The lady had like,
I would like to see some story dealing with the fact that Christina is a lesbian.
Well, she's only not yet 10 years old, isn't she?
Well, she should be 12 by she was 7 in 32, so she should be 12 by 37. Okay, and I was thinking to myself that the downtimers are going to read what the history says. They, and including her intended, who probably might not, that they probably wouldn't think it's a problem. Well, we'll just marry her off as soon as she's legally old enough. Problem solved from their point of view. But from the uptimers' point of view, there could be ethical issues involved there, and they should maybe think about that. You know, and also 12-year-old Christina is was probably old enough at this point to know enough about her history to know at an age when she's wondering. I think that would be a really interesting psychological story from Christina's point of view and from the uptimer's point of view in terms of, is it really ethical to marry her off like this?
Some of the uptimers' view. Which
Some
is
of
the-
them, you know.
yeah.
Well,
And there's a possible solution, like they could say, well, I have this thing where they have a conversation where they basically say, she doesn't actually have to have sex with him. They can artificially inseminate her, get the heirs, and then they can both go along and marry. You know, and then solve the ethical issues that way. I don't know.
Well, they could have a
But I don't think, so far it's been ignored.
Yeah. They-
It's existing through the universe, and I don't think it should be.
They've clearly already developed a partnership, a relationship, a friendship, a trust.
The
between
other
them.
question, of course, is how much knowledge of Christina's history is actually in grandchildren? I mean, they've got the movie, but the movie does not make that
No,
clear.
no, God knows.
Oh, no.
Not Hollywood.
And
In the 30s.
they've got a few encyclopedia from the year 2000,
Yeah.
which was a lot less likely to have that particular kind of detail. So there's a fairly decent chance that at least early on, until they do some research, until somebody does some serious research, they haven't actually realized that Christina's inclinations are not what they were expecting.
Well, you know, I read The Ring of Fire in 2000. When it first came out. I have a first edition paperback. Anyway, and when I read it, even though I'm not all that much on history, I already knew then.
Oh, really?
That she was, you know, just from general, you know, reading, that she was, you know, she liked to dress as a man, that she never got married, and that she made blah, blah, and she had relations, and she, you know, had.
Probably
these
since the
favorites
70s or 80s.
Her
we-
favorites.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking.
You know, and Ms. Maley would know.
She might even have some.
Yeah, I was thinking of like George Sands, who liked to dress as a man, had a male, but also had affairs with men, and was very much. I mean,
But she could be bisexual, but
Yeah.
let's at least,
The
her
thing is-
sexuality should not be ignored, is what I'm saying.
And
And at 12, it would start to become.
as a family
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
what
That
about
would be
the
a
sex
thing,
life
too.
of that
Yeah.
poor Danish prince? What is he doing waiting around for her to grow up?
Yeah.
That's another thing too, like, we
Because-
haven't, and he's got to have some, yeah.
In Sherry
And,
Wilder's,
but like, in the time, I mean, like even now, you can look at it, and I mean, the aristocrats have a very different view on it than.
I think that you can count on Christina and Ulrich getting married.
I think so too,
Yes,
because
that-
you know,
that's
from
all
the duty
good
point of view,
stuff.
but
It's
also.
all high politics.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know, that it could be put to her, if she's a really
I
hardcore,
think-
I am not attracted to men, it could be put to her, yeah, but you could have children without actually having sex.
What, with a turkey baster?
Yeah, exactly.
How
I mean,
does that
why in the world did
If they're
it
fertile,
take until
once-
recently for people to figure out
Wow.
artificial insemination? They could have done it at any
I
time
know
in
some
history.
gay guys
That's a puzzle to me.
Okay.
that
Yeah.
use that.
Realistically, we can put that to someone, but that's going into the high politics direction, which we have minimal input on. So,
I want to mention, we're having many stories that go back and pick up loose threads, and about the whole science thing. One book that I suspect many Grantville people would have had, that I read as a child and adored, was Paul de Croix's Microbe Hunters, which is a wonderful introduction to the whole question, to the whole business of how science developed with Spallanzani and Leeuwenhoek and Semmelweis and Pasteur and so on up to Walter Reed. And it's beautifully written for the common reader, as it were. And one of the things that fascinated me about it was Spallanzani, who is 18th century, studied with his cousin, Laura Bassi, who was a famous woman professor of mathematics. Now that's 18th century Italy. And we know that there were women doctors in Italy, and that upper class women in Italy had much more chance of getting higher education in one way or another than in many other countries. So following that thread, and that book could be found in somebody's attic, or maybe in a shelf in Ms. Maley's that she didn't notice and was behind other books or something, and introduced as a quick way for the common downtime reader to understand how uptimers developed science. We're saving you this trouble, as it were, but this is the way the steps work. Because it's a hell of a good read.
Can we ask David Carrico if he has any more stories about Marla Linder and Franz Sylvester and music?
do you know if he has anything?
Last time I spoke with David about that, he indicated that he had told all the stories he had for them at this point in time. And he and Eric were going to be doing a non-1632, whose name escapes me right now. He was going under the name Hydra for a while at least. And he is working on that because there's a contract for it.
Didn't I hear that they were going to come out with another Zhao Empire book that David was working on?
I'm not up to speed on the Zhao Empire.
The Marla Linder stories were, I think, the first non-mainline sort of big storyline that I just felt flipping in love.
Yes.
I like Letters to Greenough.
Yeah.
Yep.
Speaking of that, Designed to Fail, I'd love to see a sequel to that.
That Virginia's book, Destin?
Oh yeah, that was very good. That was the one about the Prince of Denmark who was appointed the head of one of, that was really good.
Who ended up marrying Gretchen's little sister.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. I need to reread that.
But I'd love to see a
She's sitting
sequel.
right out there. So
Also, she has ideas, so you could possibly be in luck at some point.
And ask her, you can tell her you loved her story, then we'll make her happy.
Authors hate that.
Speaking of that, Mr. Huff, I did like your Cordelia Cooper stories. They were.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I like those too. Those are sort of connected to the Warspell multiverse, but not exactly part of it yet. The Honoria story. One of Honoria's children merges. So basically, Cordelia is way backstory for how for one of the merged characters that hasn't been written yet. But I'm really glad you like her. I like her too. She's one of my preferred characters. Though part of her arc is the part of Amun-Re that she's in is pre-Civil War. And she becomes a working wizard for the free part of Amun-Re in the Civil War. There's an analog to the American Civil War with the southern part of Amun-Re enslaving the elves and occasionally using them for human sacrifice to get magical items and that sort of thing. And Cordelia Cooper has a long history back to not liking that. And when the Amun-Re Civil War actually breaks out with the southern part of the kingdom trying to split off and form its own kingdom because they're losing, there's the threat of losing the slavery of the elves, he becomes involved in the fighting as a wizard officer in the, I guess, the equivalent of the Union. And there's some pretty dark stuff in that is sort of setting her up for the very, very scary old lady that she becomes for
Honoria.
For Honoria. Yeah, we've got the first two books of how she got there, but there's a third and maybe a fourth book to how she got there.
And just so you know, we're almost out of time, so there's a couple more questions.
The 1632.org, when I first started reading it, there was a section on the slush pile.
Yep.
And it had, I think, 5 stories by Jose Castro that were outside, that he'd written, but were outside of canon and everything. And then when the site was reorganized, those went away. And is there any way that you, as the webmaster for the new website, could maybe bring some of those back? Because I really like those Jose Castro stories.
I understand what you mean, and we've probably got one way or another where we can get to them. The problem with posting anything that's non-canon is that you cannot convince a reader once it's out there that it's non-canon.
Right.
So there will never be a non-canon issue of 1632.
Oh yeah, no, I wouldn't.
And I'm not. We would have to go back and forth for a while amongst ourselves on whether or not we want that on the new website.
I thought it was pretty well done the way it was done originally, but.
There's Flight 19.
Yep.
There's the USS Princess Christina, and then there's the whole Keystone series.
Oh, I don't know.
And they're awesome.
Right.
But it's not necessarily something that we should touch.
Right.
I will keep it in mind.
I would recommend using the Internet Archive.
I did go into, I've never been really into the Baines Barn stuff, but I did go into the slush pile to find a couple of them there.
One last thing, that Dutch painter who did who was the Dutch painter of the time?
Rubens.
Rubens? Or
Rubens? Okay. One of the things I've noticed about these Dutch painters of the period is that they painted an awful lot of black people. And that could just mean that they were fascinated and sought them out, or to paint, or it could mean there were more black people in the Netherlands than we might think.
I think it was a little bit of a combination of both.
Right.
I suspect that, but the whole racism thing was an excuse for slavery. I mean,
Right.
this is basically where it comes from.
But I'm just saying that,
And they
because
didn't
I
have
know
it
we're
then,
almost
so
done, and I just wanted to quickly say that going back to some of those portraits of the time, those people could be used to create black down-timers.
Yeah.
Okay, and just create stories around, invent who you think they were, because they
Yeah.
were not all slaves. They were sailors, they were
Sure.
servants, not females, were servants, not necessarily slaves. And to bring some downtime black characters into it, go look at some of those Vermeer paintings and use that and let your imagination run wild.
Write us the story.
You can do it.
Did I say I've been reading this series since 2000? Y'all think if I could write one, I wouldn't have done it by now?
Gorg's done novels, and he's overcome big obstacles to do that.
And we have a website, we have bars, we have a panel coming up where we talk to you about writing, and talk to us in person. We're happy to help y'all, and we have, how long is George's story in the next one? We have a new record for shortest story.
Are you aware that most of the 1632?
It's under 100 words.
Write fiction? until these people taught them. I'm one of them.
Okay. What did you write?
My first story was in Great Mill Gazette 14. It concerned the marriage tension between a couple of high school teachers who were taking on students outside and running themselves ragged and not offering enough time to each other. The next one concerned a young German girl, a refugee from a destroyed town, who found out how important radio is to the
I remember that
effort.
one, yeah.
Yeah, well, that girl was so terrified of what would happen if all the radio equipment wore out before they could replace it, that she became the world's first electronics engineer and studied her ass off and worked herself into a frazzler. There's a scene there where her boss has to send her home to sleep for 24 hours because she collapsed on the job.
Okay, thank you all for coming. We know other people need the room, so thank you.